Hello. Hey, good to see you.
Hello, hello. Mm, Nice to see everybody.
You want to see people on the other pages, please look. Hey. Mm.
I hope everyone is doing well. Mm, It'll be good to sit together for a little while today. Mm. So yeah, let's get to work. Mm. So just slowly taking some time to get settled and comfortable in a seated posture. Just knowing there isn't a perfect posture, nor is there perfect stillness. But we do try to settle in to a basic structure of our physical position that we feel like we can be in relationship with for a while, of interest, understanding, non-manipulation. This doesn't mean at times we don't give ourselves permission to move a little, especially in the beginning. It's a little exploring, it's feeling into the different subtle ranges in the neck and the spine in particular. And feeling the weight of our bodies drawn towards the earth. This quality of heaviness. Sometimes we may notice it most clearly in the places of contact of our seat, or sitting in a chair, our feet, our backs. Sometimes we also notice that we can just experience this weightfulness throughout the body, this weightedness, seeing that there is a structure to the system that can keep the whole thing from totally collapsing. But we also don't need to strain against this natural force, this settling. But that when we move out of the kind of conceptual experience of what we think of as our bodies, or how a body is resting or active in regard to the earth, we recognize as we feel the sensations directly, there's a huge range. The heaviness, the weightedness may be one aspect. It may feel pleasant or unpleasant. We may also notice lightness, spaciousness in other places, not as a result of our effort, not rationalized through imagined impression in our minds. The experience of lightness, space, tingling, motion, changing, pressure, increasing, decreasing, warmth in one place, coolness in another, warmth increasing, warmth decreasing, coolness increasing, coolness decreasing. Hardness in one place, softness in another, earth element increasing, decreasing, throughout this range of physical experience coming and going, increasing, decreasing sensations. A flow of experience that really has nothing to do with the sense, the visual sense of our body, the visual confines that we try to fit these experiences into. Just this range of elemental sensation, increasing, decreasing, arising, passing, changing, moment by moment. And the mindfulness is really just observing the change, not focusing in, not trying to stabilize an experience, not trying to control or manage, fluid, moving, adapting, recognizing reality, not fighting with the nature of physicality, trying to understand it, harmonizing the attention, the fluidity of reality, which of course means the mind itself is not fixed or stable, solid. The attention itself is moving, changing, arising and passing, increasing in its qualities, decreasing in its various qualities. Thinking, imagining, emotions, wanting, aversion, illusion, clarity. Sometimes mindfulness arises, mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the mind, not worrying about getting concentrated, not worrying about attaining a certain experience. The mind arising with the body arising with the mind. Sensations changing, the attention arising and passing with those changes. The mind gets involved in itself, detaches from physicality. But you can still watch it, learn, understand, fathom its nature. But we also can get lost, lose perspective. So there is this encouragement to come back into the body. Its changing and undependable nature, straining the heart, strengthening the heart. Even these rhythms of distance and intimacy, moving toward, moving away. We don't need to micromanage that. When the mind is safe, it lands in reality. When it wants control, it wrangles with itself, with the world. Feel the strain, the release, compassion, care for the mind that wants peace, doesn't need stability to find it. And the mind that wants things to be the way it wants them to be seeks control and stability in its familiar ways. We watch the contraction and expansion of the heart, the rising and passing of body, of mind, trying our best to stay caring, tender, committed, honesty and clarity, the truth of what is happening, and the changing truth, moment by moment. So we do have some time today to try to answer any questions that you might have about your practice or instructions or any of the teachings we may have offered recently or anything that we might be able to support with for this week. The best way to let us know that you have a question is if you move your mouse around at the bottom of your screen, there should be a button that says raise hand. You can click on that, like Pat Hunt has just done. We'll see you. And then if that doesn't work or you can't see it, there's a little chat button. You can click in there and just let us know that you have a question. We'll call on you or wave your arms around. We'll tend to see that as well. Here we go. Hi, Pat.
I unmute. Oh, there. Okay.
There you are. Yep.
Okay. This is a broad, open question. Could you talk about intent? What is it, and how do we use it? Or anything that you might have to say about that.
Is there is there
yeah.
anything you have in particular that you're wondering about, or is it really just generally intention, intent?
I just keep hearing, that word comes up so often,
Okay, yeah.
and I don't really know what my question is, but that word keeps coming up, and
Sure. Jesse, were you going to start?
I mean, I can say a quick basic thing, I guess. Yeah, just I think in the classic Theravadan sense, and when you get into the sort of technical pieces of Buddhist psychology and Abhidhamma, I don't claim to be like a highly achieved student, but I'll say within that framework and the basic framework of our tradition, volition is really considered to kind of happen at every mind moment, right? That there is some force that is kind of motivating the action of the mind, and then what therefore also can be kind of motivating a physical gesture. And the quality of that volition, that moment of intention, is very meaningful in terms of the kind of karmic flow of phenomena, the results, but also that sense of like the results that are morally impactful as well. So it's considered like very, very important, and very subtle and kind of hard to see, important to take some responsibility around where we can see it or we do feel like we have some agency around that. A lot of it, of course, is like conditioned, that's very deeply conditioned. And sometimes it's worth real kind of recognizing the places where that might be similar or sometimes a little different to perhaps like the what we what has come. I don't know if it's just kind of Western or the English language or just the the more mundane qualities of that, regardless of kind of historical or cultural context, is just the way that gets talked about, like, oh, one's intention around doing something is a more tends to have a more sort of general, a little more vague, kind of overarching implication. And that there's like kind of both elements of that, this idea of setting one's intention. Mm. On one hand, there's considered like a very powerful force of that, and but that also that it still is like the it's still a momentary experience that may have momentum in the future, but that like each moment it's so this is it's partly why I can say like mindfulness, for example, right? Like mindfulness is momentary. And so that in order to maintain mindfulness over time, you need to keep having volitional moments that are impelling that to happen, right? That's kind of part of the nature of what we think of as concentration. It isn't just this sort of dull, like the sort of a bluntness of like, oh, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to focus on this, right? That if you look at the sort of the teachings, that moment of intention just is gone after you do that. And so you need to do it again. You need to do it again. You need to do it again. And this idea that there's like a rapid fire, like the kind of like persistence to the motivation of the attention, is partly how you start to be able to keep up with the fact that sensations are arising and passing, and the volatility of existence, that you can't really just think that you're going to have a moment of intention to do something and that that's going to persist. It there is an impact of that, and there is a faith in the value of that can come to fruition at moments that are unknown. So it isn't to say that that's not one part of it, but to understand that that kind of persistent volitional act needs to keep happening with even just mindfulness in order for it to, get honed and build and get sort of sensitive and dexterous enough to be able to be with reality. Um, so that's, I would maybe start there. I don't know if Michelle, you want to add more, or if Pat, you want to ask kind of more clarifying before we go
That
on.
was good. No, I appreciate that.
Mhm.
That was. Yeah, I don't know what to think about. I kind of think of willpower plus direction,
Mm.
or I don't know.
It's such a important question, because willpower and intention are very different.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, very different. So, in fact, I feel like it's such a broad,
Yeah.
vast question. It's hard to know. Sometimes Jesse took an angle onto it that's really important, and I could keep going with that or go somewhere else. That's how intense intention is in a way. I think that what I appreciate about intention is that it gives us choice. It
Mhm.
gives us freedom. It gives us choice. Um, it gives us responsibility for our minds and our bodies and our hearts. It's what it gives us is um, anytime we even have insight. So it's like it's so major uh, that it's sometimes it is hard to land on an angle onto it. So, for example, Sri Nisargadatta calls mindfulness the intention to understand our experience rather than to judge it. Now, if you really followed that your whole life, like if you really took that intention to heart, the level to which one isn't getting caught in expectation, anticipation, judgments, resistance, it's like because the intention is so growing that we're interested, right, in understanding what's happening right on our plate in the moment. So in some ways, it all, our understanding of motivation as well and how that it intersects it's so important. And I think that sense of like how to try to practice it is just even if you wanted to move your arm. If I miss the initial intention to move my arm, I'll, I'll, I'm probably not going to be mindful of it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where it starts really deepening our practice. If you're sitting and you decide to stand up, what is it that is the cause for the action? It's intention. But what Jesse's saying is that, like, say I have the intention to move my arm. If the intention doesn't keep going, it will stop, right? That's just how it is. There's an intention with each mind moment, and it's very hard to see. We have to slow down enough. And so, like, usually what we recommend is seeing what happens if you make any major movement and then wait. And, you might at least understand there's an intention, It's not like you're going to try to watch 10,000 intentions in the next 5 minutes, but in terms of movement, it's usually helpful before larger movements because then it's possible to be mindful of them.
Okay.
I think that's it, like the practicality of it is so
Okay.
important.
Thank you.
It's a very practical teaching because it's so basic, but it can be invisible. Willpower is when we tend to are trying to harness our energy to make something happen, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's usually
There's intention in that.
yeah, right. There's intention in it, but most of the time, if we're not necessarily aware of our motivation with willpower, generally
Okay.
speaking, and not always. But say if you want to be kind to express some kindness in action, um, one again attempts to be aware of it's kindness that's kind, not me or I or mine. And then often, because there's that understanding, there isn't a necessity for willpower because kindness has energy in it, for example. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's all helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
I mean, I want to add, I mean,
yeah.
I think it's what's cool about that particular question about in regard to willpower and direction, which I thought was like also it's important. They're not, they're using different schemas, and so you have to be. It's just it's more like taking it as an interesting exploration because I think people might be able to define will or willpower in different ways. But I think kind of what Michelle's pointing to is when we tend to use that phrase or that notion, that it's of course there's still an element of intention there directing the the action. We tend to mean will like willfulness, like a willful
Mm.
child or like this idea of like it's it's more there's a determination that is maybe more also kind of attached to outcome and identified, right? That
Okay.
we're identified with ourselves, we're identified with what we're trying to get. And so whether that is technically in the notion of will or not, or willpower, I think we tend to think of it that way. And that it is an important thing that gets put into question around where intention leads to a more kind of liberated way or not. I mean, I think that when it's attached and when it's identified with, in that sense of me and my interests and my will and what I want, and uh, very attached to the outcome or of our actions, then you start to see the perhaps like the weakening of the wisdom component in that,
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean it's not a good place to explore it, because when you're determined, sometimes it's less vague, it's less sort of like ambient, right? You really feel that you are trying to do, there's a desire to do something, right? And that is, at least it's clearer, so that it's a cool place to explore. And I think it's one of these great places where it's like it's both the most practical and the most practical and what can feel like the most esoteric pieces of the teachings can kind of come in. Its relationship to karma is like fundamental. And in fact, the Buddha said at some point, when I say karma, and karma is usually translated as action.
Right.
When I say karma, I mean intention, right? So that he's very like really weighting that side of the volitional force that goes into an action is actually the determinant thing. The action itself might be neutral, it can have different outcomes dependent upon the sort of like that volitional moment beforehand. So anyway, there's a lot of good
Yeah,
training.
it is a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
volition choosing. Is volition choosing?
Volition is conditioning, right? It's conditioning the next moment of action in one way or another. Yeah.
Thank you for all the above.
Yeah, that's great.
From both of you.
Yeah. It's like you're about to do something. And you'll hear like off sometimes at the beginning of a sitting, you'll hear us say like you can make an intention to be kind toward whatever appears, right? Or to understand what's appearing during the sitting. And this is a great place to watch that difference between willpower and intention, and that we're always saying, make the intention, because the intention has so much power. It has so much power. And the attachment to the result is, it weakens us, right? And so that learning every time you go through a sitting or a walking or whatever we're doing, the dishes, however we're doing it, if you make the intention before you do it, but then the practice is you have to let go of it and see what happens, right? But over time, you can start to see in a lifetime, if you measure it every 5 years, you'll start to see that you've actually become much more kind. Maybe not the amount you had hoped for, right? Like we tend to have this higher expectation, but really, even with mindfulness or any of this, it's like if we measure it in one sitting, it's not fair to anything or anybody because it's just too small a time frame. But if you measure it over periods of time, you'll see that everything boils down again to intention.
Thank you.
I'll just keep going, but I think that to add that, this sometimes it's like these what can feel very subtle experiences are sometimes like a little hard to relate to. Like we're not on retreat, we're busy, the world as it is. Like, but actually I think that it's important to bring up these things because it can help us just get more interested. If we're feeling like the practice is not relating to what's happening in our lives, or we're just feeling like things feel our attention is focused on like sort of other levels of reality, that kind of thing, to be like, oh, to make it a practice, to make it a, a line of inquiry, that we're focusing on, sometimes can be just a very helpful way to click back in and kind of get a little bit of grounding back into our practice if we're feeling really kind of swept up in other things. Yeah. Well, thanks, Pat.
Yeah, thank you.
Julie. Oh, we got to do the thing again. Hold on. We got to.
Unmute.
You got it.
I got it. Yeah. Fortunately, my phone is set up properly now, though. My question's related to Pat's question about intention, and it's in like everyday life. So so, okay, so I practice intention when I'm sitting and, somewhat when I'm just doing whatever. But I guess it's just like I'm really trying to figure out how I can be more intentional and mindful in my interactions with other people. So like sometimes things will happen, I'll find out something and then I get caught in the emotion of what I've been told or what's going down. And because I'm not mindful, really, yeah, I'm not really in an intentional space. My inclination is to become quite, I don't know, to jump into things too fast, and I get into lots of trouble. Way too much trouble. And like my intentions to be kind, but like my goodness, like when you get caught up in emotion and just the speed of things and relationships, things can get really off kilter. And like, I guess my question is how, well, it's all the answers you've already given about just, yeah, okay, so here comes a phone call. So then I could probably say, okay, here's another opportunity to practice doing this with an intention of kindness in the long run. Like, like instead of jumping, I can go.
Sometimes I think, I mean, sometimes you stop seeing them, but for a long time I would put little signs up, like on the refrigerator or by the phone now, but like really, like for a long time I had it just like when I woke up and was at the sink in the bathroom, just like the intention to be wise and kind as I can today. I mean, sometimes we just need these little reminders and speech. Mindfulness of speech is often the hardest of anything.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
there's a level of, I think, kind of, I don't know if I want to say cultural or human, but it's a place that being casual and not formal can be a relief. Like there can be some kind of ease of well-being in the casualness of speech. And um, the risk and danger of that is clearly
Mm.
depending on the type one is. Some people really are so um, more naturally quiet and careful. They don't tend to jump in as much, right? I'm more of the type that I am very introverted, but I will tend to jump in instead of pause. And, it's a great place to watch regret because it's just like, oh, whoa, pause, pause, pause. And so really, I mean, actually computers and the whole delete button has been so helpful. Delete and forgiveness and the delete button and the pause, all that I actually use in my speech within
Mhm.
myself. Like a
Mhm.
lot of times I'm really proud. I proud of myself for how much I do that compared to what I used to be. Like the restraint. I am practicing, from my perspective, so much restraint compared to what I used to be like. But I would say I have a ways to go on that one.
That's really helpful. I really do have a ways to go. I really do. But I'm more mindful now than I used to be, I know. Um, But like sometimes the damage can be done and it's like a couple hours later that you go, oh dear. Or, you start to go deeper down into what was my emotion that was so deep down there that I didn't know it, when I was doing such and such.
Well,
I think
I think, and one more thing, I think Jesse, I'm sure is a lot. This is all about mindfulness of speech and communication, and it's again, it's a big open field to discuss.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think this morning I had an interaction. I've never had something like this happen, but I said something to a neighbor that I felt really like bad about after I said it. And I actually ran after this person. And I can't run anymore, but I walked as fast as I have in probably 5 years. I walked, and so I apologized, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I almost was like, that made it almost like, did I make it worse by apologizing? But she's like, "What are you talking about?" Like that thing I said like very recently. And she's like, "Oh, don't worry about it." But it was like sometimes I think we
Mhm.
also can be overly worried about certain kind of casual speech. But I do like I felt better about attempting to clear up if there was any harm, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes though, when there's like a really long history in a relationship, it wouldn't take just a quick running up to the person or calling them back and saying, "Well, this,"
Yeah, right.
because
Well,
it's so much to unpack.
that's years of feeling misunderstood on both levels. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
you're describing years of feeling misunderstood, and that whole really just the intention to understand rather than to judge, it just pulls it back and pulls it back and pulls it back, pulls it back and
Hmm.
pulls it back. Yeah, you just have to kind of keep remembering that over and over again when we speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And think about what's the repercussion on the other person, you know, of,
Right. And
uh,
that what I'm saying is that you can't always control that. Like sometimes someone will feel that we're not understanding them and it isn't it isn't what we're doing and other times it is. So it's really complex. That this complexity, you know what it's like just to do a sitting like this and try to understand yourself, right? Like
mhm.
it's hard enough to understand ourselves in 5 minutes of paying attention. But then when you add another being and there's a deep karma with them, it requires so much ability to start again. It takes so much commitment to start again and to start again and to start again and to attempt to really listen.
Yeah, and not give up, you know, hardest situations, I guess.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
Thank
Jesse, you must have so much with this, so do you? Or maybe not.
yeah, who doesn't? I think what I would just want to say a little about that to me I think is an important aspect of it, but that Julie I feel like you've brought up is something about like and Michelle also just like kind of casual versus formal. It's like the on one hand, we'll say with certain relationships in particular, you want to feel like you can be honest and be able to kind of be expressive of your emotions and feel like there is kind of space for that to play out and that maybe in some ways we hope that our most developed friendships would have some like elasticity, right, to handle conflict or to handle strong emotions or feelings. And so there's that part of like not, wanting to be able to quote unquote be ourselves in kind of comfortable, what might be more comfortable relationships, or what we'd like to be comfortable relationships, and the complexity of that, and the sense that we still can do harm and we still can create misunderstanding, and that sometimes a certain level of volatility internally, this relationship can't handle it healthily, right? And that it ends up becoming a dynamic and a kind of perpetuates things that are difficult. Um, so there's like the side of like the relationship and the caring and the what can sometimes be a little bit of a grief process in terms of starting to feel like we actually might need to be more formal in relationships that we'd rather be more casual in, but that there's something there about a kind of, I don't know if you want to call it discipline or determination or just carefulness, right? That we start to see is necessary in order to make it maybe through certain conversations or certain, times. The other side of that that's hard, it's not just relational, but kind of like partly what you're describing around like what do we imagine it means to be a quote unquote mindful communicator or something like that, right? And that does that mean does that not include emotion, right? Does that not include um, stronger feelings about things? And I think that is a long conversation and sort of like range of things to unpack. But I think the concern generally that I feel like is a meaningful concern is that to be what I think is the healthiest version of communication around maybe difficult topics or things that feel very evocative is not one that necessarily is that it's not one that's repressing your emotions, right? Because I think sometimes that's what we think needs to happen, and that's exactly why we don't do it, because we don't feel like we want to be repressing how we feel in order to be communicating with someone, in part because it feels like we're needing to be dishonest with ourselves and maybe with someone else, and that dishonesty feels like a kind of lack of connection, right, with ourselves or with another person. And so the question is like, if it's not repression of an emotion or of certain volatility or whatever is happening, but you're also not trying to fan the flames of more volatility, what does this feel like and what does this look like? And I think that is the perpetual sort of exploration where I would still say that there's something very important about not just kind of quashing down our emotions, but also not creating more klikia between people and more trouble. So it's like it's not easy. And so I think and then some relationships are different in terms of how much of that tension and elasticity they have to be able to handle it and manage it. And then sometimes it does require some repression and some discipline. Sometimes it requires more openness. And I think that to not feel like there's just one way, that like, oh, if you were a mindful person, you would be doing this, versus like, how do we take responsibility for what's happening internally and not deny that, right? That we're in anguish or we're angry or that there's something that's been triggered around a certain pain and we care about something so much, but we feel powerless. And so we get worked up, for example. Where do we recognize that, feel that we can be mindful of that, care for it, understand it, right? Not try to crush it in a way that's also just going to stuff it into a corner, but also that it can dissipate, right? It can play out. If we're mindful of it, there's like it doesn't need to perpetuate either. And that we then, when we're actually speaking, what is going back to this question of intention and volition, right? What is the intention? Are we trying to create, are we trying to burn down the world? Or are we trying to have like sort of like maintain a connection through something difficult that's happening in ourselves or in someone else? And that carefulness and that capacity is something that's hard, but is doable. And that sometimes there is a way of slowing down. I mean, I think Michelle sort of touched on this too, and that you did too, Julie, of just like, where do you kind of be like, the stakes can feel really high and that there's a lot of volatility. And it's like, okay, where do you just slow down, take the time to really be careful with your, like what you're trying to say, and differentiate what you're trying to communicate from maybe what you're feeling. There's a way of just sort of like slowing down and breaking it down that can be helpful in that, as
Yeah, I'm really
many
hearing
things.
that I'm really hearing that. Well, the intention then can be, well, if it's repair, then it can be an intention to be, like you say, like careful, um, and to be kind and both to my own self and to the effect of how the other person's feeling. Um, so that's really helpful. Like that's what I was sensing. Like, well, that's what does happen often is there's this, distance created for a bit. And then, like the other person needs to have some time away or I do or whatever. This is a particular primary relationship. And
Mm,
so it's an ongoing learning,
mhm.
you know.
But I think you're right. The thing about repair also is, it's like, as Michelle was saying, it's like just sometimes it really prioritizing that, knowing that we're going to make mistakes, or people are going to make mistakes, and we try to do our best, and also just, I mean, there is something about your own dignity and not wanting to have others not recognize that or not value that, and then something about, yeah, what does it actually mean to be behaving in a dignified way as well, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you very much. This is
Yeah. Thank
helpful.
you, Julie.
Great. Great.
Kristen.
Hi, hi, Krista.
Thanks, many thanks to both of you for being here, and the Sangha really means a lot to me. And some weeks ago, Michelle, you said in a Dharma talk, you quoted something, the winds of circumstance blow through emptiness. Who can they harm? I'm wondering if you could say more,
Blow across
blow
across empty.
emptiness.
Yeah.
Who can they harm? And I'm just wondering if both of you could say a little bit more about that.
I think it's a really appropriate quotation for these times. I think that of course it's appropriate anytime, but I think that for us to come to grips with the pain in our within and without, like the suffering and the unnecessary suffering, this is attributed to Kuan Yin. It's a quote. It's a bodhisattva of compassion. That quotation is just infused with wisdom and compassion, right? It's so deeply infused with the sense that, well, to me, it's like the intention to live out karma, that we take responsibility for being born here in this world of Vedana, pleasure, pain, right? Neutral. And that on a deep level, that the intention is to get less and less identified with it as me, mine, or I, or you, or ours, and so that I think that compassion is purifying the wisdom, and the wisdom is purifying the compassion. This particular quotation is like so very clearly understanding that the karma is actually not going to harm. That what is actually happening, the winds of circumstance, the karma, blow across emptiness. That's the anatta part. You know, it's like it's not personal. So therefore, there's nothing to fear. It's really a basis for fearlessness, and that's what I feel like this is what the Buddha taught as its greatest protection and safety.
Like looking inward, I can kind of accept it more than looking outward. Like, what does this mean for the people of the Sudan?
Right. No, part of the problem this morning was that some people were talking about some stuff and I just, it's so unbelievably painful. Yeah, it's beyond, it's like trying to experience, it's accepting that it's unbearable. I don't know if that's what I
I
mean,
think it's
that's,
you
yeah.
can't you don't want to confuse the absolute and the relative. You want to understand that they inform one another, but that they're also different. And so the idea that the person saying this quote of like what I don't know, the winds blow across winds of what? Circumstance blow across the sands of emptiness or the fields of emptiness, the ocean of emptiness,
All phenomena,
the emptiness of emptiness.
all phenomena.
Right.
Yeah.
Who can they harm? Right. This idea of like the person saying that is Kuan Yin, like the bodhisattva of compassion, the person who or being who most appreciates the suffering of the world, you know. But it's like to get that the perspective, you can actually only have maximum compassion if you're also have the maximum fathoming of the emptiness. That those things actually go hand in hand versus contradict one another. And I think that's part of the beauty of that kind of paradox, that she's conveying in that. So it's not to say things don't matter or that suffering isn't real and kind of Kristen, just like you're saying, that we can get on some level personally that things are very empty, right? That there might not be a coherent, solid self, and that that understanding provides an incredible sanctuary and safety from the winds of change. And that I would say the process of getting to that understanding and having to go through all of the heart-wrenching truths of reality that are also reality, right? The relative level of reality deepens our ability to care for it.
Though I didn't hear this quote decades ago, as far as I can remember, I think my reaction to it or something like that back then would be yes, but, and I'm finding, it's kind of been in my consciousness since you said it, since Michele said it, and it's And it's a yes and. No. And it was the and that I didn't hear. So, yeah, thank you. I was,
That-
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think it's just that to be able to accept that something is happening because it's happening. Just that, like that there's nothing else but that. And like if you take the situation that's happening there, like it's like um, it's such an impossible situation to even imagine being able to help a little bit. And yet the nun, the head nun, the abbess of the nunnery next to Chazwa, she asked for everybody's metta, right? And so that's really important to remember that she has such faith in metta, in being helpful. Um, so that finding that place of being able to accept it because it's happening versus any kind of condoning it because it's happening, that's where I think it gets very paradoxical, and it has to kind of stop. It has to stop the mind from um, basically bringing us into a black hole, right? Like a permanent black hole. I don't mean a temporary black hole because there's such utter despair in what is happening, but that the compassion, the metta, the equanimity, they can um, give us the tools to witness this. Because if we don't witness it, it's actually worse for everybody there. So to me, I haven't thought about how to articulate this well, but it's like the intention to connect to the pain in the world, not just the pain inside of us, but the pain in the world. If we develop that and cultivate that, which you have so much, it's like um, it's bound to bring us to places that we can't withstand, and we have to take breaks with. Uh, And there's a woman writer, Renee Graham, that writes for the Boston Globe, but she said this about something else happening right now. But she said it's like we're all soldiers right now, and that we need R&R. So if you see yourself as a soldier of compassion, for example, it's like if you don't take some space from being connected to that level of pain, um, it will usually become too overwhelming. So like the Buddha taught that the overwhelm and the helplessness in the face of it is actually how we can cultivate compassion. If you go into the black hole with it, it's better to take the R and to pull out, which But I think it's just that reminder for all of us with all of this. It's what Dalyusana asked for was for us to witness this with metta. And of course, whenever we can actually do something, we will. But it's like there's a lot of just having to wait and send metta and wait and send metta and wait and wait and send metta. And that's hard sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do. But, regularly. I did. I guess it was about a week ago. I was doing some errands, and there was a young woman, probably in her 20s, on the street, who was doing fundraising for Amnesty International, and she engaged, or we engaged each other, and she started telling me all these facts, about Gaza. And I said, it's okay. It's okay. I know. I know. Um, I do keep up. And then she would say it again. And I or something new, like another statistic. And I just burst into tears. I didn't have a Kleenex, and she didn't have a Kleenex. And so I finally found a old mask in my bag and blew
Oh,
my nose.
that's a useful.
And so then we talked a bit about amnesty, and then she started again. And I just burst into tears again. And I said, I've been through so many wars and assassinations and coups. Um, I was probably old enough well, I'm definitely old enough to be your grandmother. But somehow I'm kind of glad that it happened, because there was a release in it. And to take in the level of suffering is is really overwhelming at times. And that was one of those times I just felt overwhelmed. And yet I remembered what you say in the compassion retreats, that being overwhelmed is the proximate cause of compassion. But you can't stay there.
Right.
So thank you for
Yeah, it's really there's an art. There's an art to connecting with pain and then stepping back and connecting. Maybe we drown, we go in, but we step back even more. It's like it's not something that stays static. It changes and changes and changes, which is very beautiful. I mean, I think that being able to actually cry right now sometimes is very important, really important.
I think I do want to just say another, like, just that word of it's everything that we say about compassion in this context is true. And um to not forget the emptiness part of that quote, right? That it's easier to find our way to legitimizing compassion in the face of all of this, right? Of the world and reality, because you can kind of get there in a logical way. The the truth of how of emptiness, right, is sometimes not as gratifying or satisfying to a certain part of the heart. And I don't want to also lose that aspect of that quote of what is sort of powerful in that conundrum of it, and to not forget that as well, I have a this may not feel related at all, but I'm going to show it to you, and I don't even know what I'm showing you, but to me it does feel related, but maybe more in that same Zen way. I saw this
Uh, oh, this is
I
funny.
saw
Oh my
this
God.
yesterday. I've been to this lake a million times. This was not there today. It was only there yesterday. So I can't tell you exactly what I think that metaphor is, but I think it's there.
It's a little baby Loch Ness monster. That's what it is.
It's just what are we? Or there's these little like we're something, but we're just these little whirlpools, and in this vastness, and it's amazing to sort of see that sometimes and recognize it. And it doesn't mean the vastness isn't real, um, but the nature of like what we are uh, in that context is important, and it's not meaningless. Puts things into a perspective.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. It's a great
Mhm.
quote. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Mm.
Good to see you all. Mm. Good luck. One more week.
Hanging in there.
You're doing it. You're doing it.
Yay.
Mm. Take good care of yourselves, each other, your worlds.
Mm.
See you soon.